Welcome to The Truth in His Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today I'm in conversation with a leading fashion and sustainability advisor, as well as a fashion design specialist based in New York. Please welcome Thomasine Dolan Dow. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rob. Thank you.
So how are you today?
I'm well. Thank you.
Yes, we had the sun out. It was a little rainy earlier, but we're here. We're out here.
We've arrived. Yeah.
Yes, and we're in spacious. What part of New York are we in?
We're in Soho. So you're in a loft in Soho.
I've come up.
This building used to be, all of Soho used to be an industrial area, and it was for manufacturing. Yeah. And this building was for manufacturing. It was like a machine shop. So.
Nice.
In the late 1800s is when it was built.
Yeah, I had to sign in when I got in here. It was like, "Are you a member?" I was like, "Oh, no, I'm kidding."
Stop.
So I gave literally the cut and paste introduction of what your background looks like and what your role is. It's literally from LinkedIn, as you told me. So could you share with us what your background is and what was your relationship with fashion when you were younger?
Yeah. So, my relationship with fashion when I was younger was, there weren't any fashion magazines in my house growing up. It's funny because in my adult life, when I started working amongst designers, who they seem to have real ties to it. Like their mothers always had Vogue, their mothers always had Bazaar, their mothers always had these fashion magazines. Their mother shopped designer labels, and so they were coming from a very different place that I came from. There were no fashion magazines in our house. So I would just buy my comic books and we'd go to 7-Eleven and buy comic books and I would draw them. I would imitate those drawings and I loved the clothes they were wearing. So that combined with having two older sisters who were each 4 years older than me, so 4 and then 8 years older than me, and their clothes to me were always so exciting because they were just that much ahead of me. They were more mature and they got to buy clothes that looked like fashion, that was more like the girls in the comic books I was trying to draw. So I would always try their clothes on and wear their clothes and all that sort of stuff. So I just always loved fashion. I didn't really know what it meant or what you do with that. I just thought I could draw it. And so that was my early beginning stages. And then not knowing that it would lead to anything.
So your background is in the sustainability world, it's in the fashion world. So tell us about that career trajectory.
Well, yeah, my background. Well, before I got to that place, I did go to school at the Maryland Institute of Art.
Yeah.
It wasn't called MICA back then.
It was not.
It was not. It was called the Maryland Institute, or actually everybody just called it the Institute of Art. I know that because when I had a project I was working on and I had to go to a graphic design house and I, humbly introduced myself as Thomasine from the Maryland Institute College of Art. And he's like, "I can tell you're still a student, right?" And I was like, yes. And, but anyway, because I was studying graphic design at that point and illustration, because MICA did not offer fashion courses at that time. They had used to, but they'd stopped doing it. And so there was nowhere to study, and I was much too afraid to move to New York. There were just nobody ahead of me had done that. People in my family hadn't gone to college, so there was just not a whole lot of guidance there. So I studied illustration, fashion, in lieu of fashion design. And also, so I was going to night school and working full-time for the Food and Drug Administration on, is that Howard Street? I forget where we're located, but anyway, downtown. And working for them and going to school at night. And then I moved out to LA with some friends, and it was really just for a summer. It was like, let's just have fun for summer, then we'll go back and start our real lives, in Baltimore after the summer's over. And while I was out there, I just got incredibly bored. Like after a month, it was just really boring. You can only go to the beach so much. So I got a job, and I got a job in advertising. And I worked my way up. I wasn't like hired as an art director. I worked my way into that position. I was working in the research department, and just every chance I had, I would go to the art department and be like, "Hey, do you need any help with your storyboards?" Or,
hey guys,
yeah, right. Hey, hi, I'm on the 14th floor. So I did. And they'd be like, "Yeah, sure." So I'd work nights doing extra work for the art directors and et cetera, et cetera. So eventually, I did work my way up into becoming a junior art director for an ad agency out there. And then, so it wasn't until I moved to New York then. So we stayed there for 3 years. I was just tired of being surrounded by people who didn't seem to be reading. Like, it was so, like, I was in the best shape of my life. I was always riding my bike and going to the beach, but like, I just felt like, has anybody read a book? Like, do you read the newspaper even? And, it was like, I was being too flattered by people thinking that I had a big vocabulary. And it was like, just that you don't have a vocabulary. Anyway, so I was sort of craving something bigger. And so we decided to move to New York. And not having ever lived here, didn't have any contacts here. And we moved, and we arrived on the Upper West Side, which is kind of a weird place for someone in their 20s to, a single person, but we stayed there. But it was during this time, we threw a party, and one of the people there was a fashion designer. It was this guy named Charles Nolan, and it all came flooding back to me. It was just like, oh, this is what I really want to do. And it was before cell phones, so I kind of stalked him in a legal way,
legal stalking,
in a healthy legal way, and would call him just on the telephone, on the landline, and hey, it's me, and could I show you some sketches? Could I show you drawings? And eventually he did look at them, and he had his own comments and criticisms, and they were all fair. And for some reason or other, he hired me as an assistant. He had just gotten this job, and he needed another assistant. The smart thing about him, though, was one of his assistants went to FIT, so went to fashion school, so that I came in not really knowing much at all. And so I felt like she was training me to some degree. So that was really the beginning of it. And then, but the tricky part was, after a year, he was fired, which meant the design team was fired, because we were part of him. We were like on his coattails. And so then I lost my job with barely any experience, and that was what I wanted to do. Right. So that was a bit tricky. But I just kept at it and just kept sketching and drawing and trying to build a portfolio. And he would meet with me and look at my sketches and try out my portfolio. And then I just started cold calling, Back when you could cold call by literally showing up at an office building, figure out which floor the company is on, and just walk into a lobby, and there's a receptionist there, and you introduce yourself, and that's what I did. And one of the places I did that to was Ralph Lauren. Ralph Lauren at that time had their own little building. It was it was very much like an atelier. It was like most places in New York were not like that. It was literally a former house. So it was like a 5-story house on 56th Street or 55th Street, between 5th and 6th Avenues. And that was one of the places I cold called. And I went back over 4 different interviews each time, what am I going to wear? Because it's all about the outfit, and Ralph Lauren is so specific, and could I pull it together? And anyway, but eventually they offered me a job there. So I feel like that was really the beginning. The first was kind of like a test. Do I really want to be in this business? When I had that first job, and then when I started with Ralph Lauren, that was kind of like the beginning for me. So
it's one of my favorite brands right there. And when I saw that in the bio, I marked out. I was like, oh yes, yes. I remember it was one period where I went through a process where I'd lost a bunch of weight, and I had all of these rugbies and things that were in the crib that were unpopped. The tags were still on there, and I was like, what am I going to do with these? I can't fit these. People are lining up. It's like, I can take those off your hands. I'm like, you wear half what I currently wear, so you're never going to fit that. It was a challenge letting those go. So speak to me a bit about where you're at in your career, namely the Material Innovation Initiative, MMII, as a fashion design specialist.
Yeah. So that was, I'm so happy to be doing what I'm doing right now, I have to say, because after putting 20 years actually more than 20 years into fashion, which is like just creating product, a lot of product. And then hitting that moment where you're like, the brakes, you're like, wait a minute, what am I doing with my life here? What, and is this how I want to go out? It's like just making more stuff in the world. And, so it also was combined with like looking around at the landscape, and I don't know who else I want to work for, who's doing something responsibly. I mean, Eileen Fisher is a women's brand that's been doing it since its inception. It wasn't the aesthetic that I was drawn to. So ultimately, I just decided I need to make a shift. I'm just going to learn everything I can about sustainability. So I took courses, read everything I could read. I started creating I did create my own glossary. So I have a 20-page glossary of things that relate to sustainability and fashion, and even beyond that, because it also extends to farming and regenerative agriculture and all that sort of thing, which I didn't realize once I started deep diving into fashion sustainability. You learn about farming, and there's all sorts of other stuff that goes along with it, of course. So it was during that process that I met the founders of MII, and they were really interesting women. They both came from, one is a trained lawyer, and the other is a serial entrepreneur. But they had worked together creating this ecosystem for the plant-based food movement that happened 10, 12 years ago. So they were really instrumental in getting all these brands launched to put plant-based foods out in the market that were affordable and comparative to prices as meat-based, meat products. So they had this thing that they did that was hugely successful, and then they were smart enough to, be paying attention to what else is happening in the world, which was fashion is being blamed right now for a lot of dirty practices. And so their idea was I think we can take what we did for plants and meat-based products and do that for materials. Right. So it was this mirror image that they had in mind. So like I said, I was lucky enough to meet them, and I could bring to the table what I knew about fabric materials and, what they require energy-wise, because that's where most of the emissions happen from materials. In fashion, it's from the materials aspect of it. And again, so these women were focusing on animal-based materials, which include leather, obviously, but also wool, silk, down, from chickens and goose and geese, I should say, and then exotic skin. So they were focused on the animal-based fabrics, which I thought was really interesting, because when you start learning about farming as it pertains to the environment, you quickly learn that industrial agriculture is a really big factor in, bringing down the planet. So that was great. So in working with them, establishing a foothold and getting people to believe in us. And so they also, hired a scientist, and they hired another innovation person who was with them it was called the Good Food Institute, GFI is where they came from. And so they brought a few people along who worked with them there. And so I was holding down the fashion pillar, but they had, all these other skills of knowing how to build a business, which I didn't know how to build that kind of a business. And quickly, within 2 years, we're a source now because of the scientific work that's gone into it, as well as the innovation work in terms of where people are putting their money, like investors and brands, and looking at the landscapes on those two things, because there's a ton of investment that's gone into these material startup companies, and the brands are definitely eager to get them. Not a lot of them are ready yet because they're still in R&D. And anyway, so that's kind of them, I think.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
I have to figure out how to get shorter with answers.
No.
I'm just you're going to start falling asleep soon.
No, absolutely not.
Watching your eyelids flutter.
No, I've had not enough coffee today. And late night yesterday. So what would be that seminal moment? And you may have touched on it. What would be that seminal moment for you that you knew that you wanted to go into fashion? I think you touched on it.
Oh, yeah, that was the party.
Yeah, but so that'll bring me to this next question then. Huh. So I think this is the gems when you kind of look back. What is something you know now that you wish you knew when you started out? Like something like a big thing? Because there's many things. Like as I was describing,
so many.
When we were first talking, like, man, I wish I knew certain things about audio when I started this like 13 years ago. Now I'm like, oh yeah, that's nothing. Click, click, boom, I'm done. Now, so what would that look like for you?
There are a couple of things, and it's a really interesting question that I hope people do reflect on, especially when they're in their 20s starting out. So for me, because I moved to New York after LA, and I'd already put like a couple of years into this other industry, which would be graphic design and advertising. And so by the time I moved to New York, I was already in my mid-20s, and I felt this panic about, no, I need to get in my career. And so rather than taking another like 2 years to really learn about like fashion in terms of pattern making and the more technical side of fashion, because I didn't really have that. And I learned on the job, for sure I learned on the job, but I always felt kind of like I was faking it because everybody I was working with like had that technical skill, that background of being able to make a pattern. They made garments, they put on collections. And so I always felt kind of, I hate to use the word imposter syndrome, but it always, that always lived with me. But at the time I was like, no, I have to make money. I've got rent to pay. And I was so worried about not having money. Where in hindsight, I'm like, God, I could have done it. I could have done that, gotten a degree and made money doing something, to pay for the tuition of whatever. I could have done it. So that was a big one that I still, feel like haunted by now. And the other one is, I think, being really honest with everyone you're working with. And when you don't know something, admit it. When they're saying something you don't know what they're talking about, like you have to be honest and figure out how to be honest in a way that shows you're paying attention and you care, and that's why you're asking the question. And then the last thing I would say is, like, especially when you're in your 20s, you don't realize that these same people you're working with are gonna pop up in your professional life, like 20 years down the road, and they may be the one that's hiring you as a boss. So like, really be polite, really be decent to people. And don't, because the fashion world can get pretty catty, can very gossipy. So just know that this group you're with, like they might have hiring power 10, 20 years down the road. So
what's that saying? Be careful of the people that you step over as you go up that ladder. It's a paraphrase, obviously, because you probably will see them when you're coming back down at a point.
Yes.
And I think that notion of feeling like you have it all figured out in your 20s, that's a thing that's still happening. And I had a complete career shift. Like, I started this pursuit at like 24 because I felt like I was burnt out at 24.
Wow.
And it was just like, I'm doing all of this cool stuff and I'm making good money, but really I don't feel sated creatively. And I was like, oh, let me do this data sheet. Let me do this. Let me put together these TPS reports. Wow.
Well, you're clearly a quick learner. I felt like I was learning all the time. So, but you studied some of that stuff in school. So you've had that layer of confidence under you probably. So I understand why you maybe got bored quickly.
Yeah. And then there's that dynamic, like, degree of difficulty, right? With all of the stuff that I kind of knew of, I worked in a Spanish speaking call center when I started out and I don't speak Spanish. So it's just like, hey, go ahead and just piss it all away. It's fine. You know that leg up that you had? So obviously, we connected initially on LinkedIn. So that's a social media platform, right? Yeah. So what role do you think that social media plays in fashion today? And tell me how mindset. Well, actually, that's a whole separate question. Have them together, that's a separate question. Tell me about the role that social media plays in fashion today. Mm-hmm.
I would carve LinkedIn out of that because I think LinkedIn is a force for good for the most part because it does connect people and gives you access to people because you can't cold call people the way I did back in the day. So I would carve that out as a separate thing. But I think that social media with fashion, I don't know. I definitely struggle with it at times because it doesn't always promote the best things. And it just, right now, one of the problems with fashion is the cycles. Like, I think I mentioned before, like we have so much product in the world, and the deliveries and the drops and retailers wanting more and more and more, and people wanting more and more and more. There's always this avarice for more stuff. And I feel like social media often creates that, like, I need that. And, and then unfortunately, like, not all people who need that can afford to buy the really good stuff, which is never going to get thrown out or go to landfill. It'll get handed down or shared with friends or whatever. But unfortunately, a lot of the I need that comes with, cheap clothes and fast fashion. And so then it's like, it's good enough for this party. And then, I'm just going to throw it out. And so we have overconsumption. And I think that social media, like TikTok and some great Instagram, it's constant everything is shopping right now. It's like shopping is the national sport. And I just feel like that's not good. So I do feel like that's been a bad thing for fashion, as well as from the brands, the fashion brands. They constantly feel the need to replenish and update and send more. And it's just a lot of noise out there right now.
Yeah, that's legit. I mean, I'll go and look for a few things. I like a few brands. I enjoy a few brands. And then suddenly in my Instagram feed, it's like, can you leave me alone with targeted ads? I don't
my God,
want
the targeted
those.
ads. I know. Yeah. Well, you're a step ahead of most people. Most people don't know what their thing is, what their look is, who their brands are. And that's something I feel like, I'm in the business, so like, you would assume I would know that, but I feel like it took me years to hone that, just like, this is my color palette. Like, I don't, you can see I'm pretty much wearing 3 of those colors right now, like navy, gray, and white. And I feel like I learned that. I didn't learn that then, but there was this moment in time when I was working for Armani Exchange, and we would go to Milan and work with Mr. Armani. So with Giorgio Armani, I was like, oh my God, I'm with Giorgio Armani. What is happening? How my life is so crazy. And like, because he was kind of at his height back in at that point. This was like, oh God, it was in the 90s. So he was really, really huge. And so we would go there to work on stuff. And I remember so I would always read everything about him. And one interview I read this thing about him. He's like, I only wear navy blue. I love navy blue. His car is navy blue, his clothes are navy blue, everything is navy blue. He has like bright blue eyes, and it's just like, it works for him.
That's hard.
And it really got me thinking about that's a smart strategy, and then from then on, I was like, the whole idea of like your clothes as uniform. And I realized how that simplified things for me. Mm-hmm. Like if I can create a uniform using certain colors, and I know button down shirts, that's my thing. I like button front shirts. Whatever, and then the colors, and suddenly your wardrobe kind of works with everything. Yeah. It can always go front to backwards and the other thing is it's not out of date necessarily so quickly if you know what your palette is, know what looks good on you, etc. So I think I got way off tangent. I don't know how that started.
That's a gem right there.
Okay.
And I think it kind of ties into what the next question is. Tell me how mindset, perhaps self-acceptance, plays into that personal fashion sense. Because people I don't know what my color palette is yet. I'm told it's somewhere in the middle. It's like, oh yeah, you like burgundy, you should wear more burgundy. I was like, yeah, sure, why not? But I don't know what it is. But I find that if I wear a certain article or what have you, like, I'll throw on Carhartt because I'm going to work. I'll throw on my ridiculous artist rings. It's like, oh yeah, I'm working right now. And so I'm wearing these rings, I'm working. So tell me about that how mindset kind of plays a role into your personal fashion sense.
Yeah. I feel like I would break it into 2 chapters. There was like my younger years in my, teenage through 30s, quite honestly, or through, maybe not all my 30s, but like early 30s. I did a lot more experimental looks, I just was like, pushing in there. It was always, vintage mixed with whatever. And, you can get away with a lot of stuff when you're in your 20s. And I was definitely influenced by, music videos. MTV was a new thing, like you could never imagine. And it played music. I know.
What's that?
What? Yeah. Someone should have told them. And so that influenced me, and I felt really comfortable with that. And I think I should back up a little bit. I think that some of the things that informed me in my life now, and even then, was so I went to a Catholic school for like the first 6 grades, and there's something about the Catholic uniform which goes back to that uniform idea. Like, it was not that I wanted to go to school to wear a uniform, like because when I had the chance to leave and go to public school, so I go wherever I want, I jumped at that chance. But I do realize, like, I really like uniforms. I mean, I like marching band uniforms. I like sports uniforms. I like school uniforms. So that kind of was a good place for me to be. And so playing around with that and how to make that uniform idea like more interesting. And so like you see Tom Brown, I don't know if you know his fashions, but like he definitely plays around with uniform and in extreme ways, which I love. And so for me, I played around with uniforms in my ways to make it work. And so that was so that was like one side. And then for me now, I feel like I have confidence. I definitely have confidence with what I wear because and that comes with age. Like, like I know who I am. I know what I am. And I know what looks good on me. So I don't know that all women or men get to that place, but for me, I feel very confident with my choices.
Yeah.
And I also know, I also tend to buy things that are, I want to say, somewhat timeless. Yeah, somewhat timeless. And that also plays into sustainability, which is, if you're going to like go ham on buying trendy things, that's when you get into trouble, right? But it's one thing is buying cheap and trendy, and then there's buying expensive and trendy. Mm-hmm. Cheap and trendy is going to definitely go in the trash before you get to the next year. Expensive and trendy, you're going to save it because that trend is likely to come back around in 5 years or so. So I still have stuff in my closet. Like I have stuff from junior high, middle school, like Levi's corduroys. Like I still wear them, and I get compliments on them because they're like a pale yellow. And so anyway, so I think it's knowing how to shop things and like knowing when to spend a little more money on something, like a decent pair of shoes that, so.
That's akin, at least in my head, the way that I'm kind of formulating it to, like when someone is planning out like something in data, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say the currency, what you're spending on it is the time. You might spend a lot of time on planning and coding this thing out, but in the back end, you're really going to appreciate the time that you put in because you could just run that code and it's going to save you time later, but you had to put that time in on the front end.
Yeah.
And secondly, a thing that I thought of was the oldest article clothing that I have is like this Russell t-shirt, but it was my high school t-shirt.
Oh, so it's super nostalgic.
It's from 1999.
Wow.
And it actually fits a lot better. I was like, how big was I then? Because I'm a bigger person now. And I was like, this is loose on me. I was like, what was the fashion we had going on? I can't find the shorts.
Oh, 90s fashion. Okay. So I have to think about that. Yeah.
It was essentially, I was wearing a caftan that was made out of cotton. It's not great. It's not great. So I think the world can beat you down as a creative. Like just that's hard stop. Yeah. Bad reviews, long hours, and people could be unkind. Share any tips or lessons that you've learned to remain optimistic?
Yeah. That is like first response is a laugh, a nervous laugh. I think that I naturally am an optimistic person, but when you catch wind of something negative that someone said about you or maybe wrote about you, it's really harsh. And you have, for me, like you have like a really bad day. It leads to a bad day, maybe a couple of bad days. And then I work really hard to compartmentalize it and put it in a drawer and close it and just like push that drawer in because otherwise it will eat away at me. And I think it's a special talent I have for being able to do that because, some people in my own family, like I see they don't have that ability and some things will eat away at them more and more. And I keep trying to like remind them of the good things. I do that with myself. I remind myself of, not just good experiences I had, but when people said nice things to me. And, that's really rewarding. They complimented the work I did or they appreciated the work I did or, the things that... So I have to always remind myself of those good things because otherwise the bad stuff can really bring you down. And it's really demotivating. And that's the biggest thing is like when you have work to do, you can't let yourself be caught off track by demotivating things that are negative, because it's a real work stopper.
Yeah. That's important. I kind of use something similar, use an approach that's similar, and it was something I think I saw in a video. I forget who it was. It was something sports related. That's another thing that's popping up in my Instagram feed, and it was something where the person speaking, he's like, however the best you were versus the worst you were perceived, however that's framed. Okay. You're never either. You're somewhere in the middle. He's like, just remember that. So someone just takes a shot that sucks and it hurts. Put that in its box, compartmentalize it, all of that. And when you have those wins, do the same and just stay on whatever that path is that you're doing. Be accountable to yourself. Yeah. And
it's hard to lead with that. You try to lead with that positive thing, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not always hard, but it's such a mental game. It's totally in your head.
Yeah.
So.
I think it can play a role in kind of what you're creating and how you're going about things. It's like, well, maybe I should do less interviews. Maybe I should do shorter ones, or maybe I should change the type of questions. And it's interesting where, this is like podcasting is very feedback oriented. Like how many reviews, you live and die with those reviews and live and die with those downloads. You're getting it almost instantaneous. And it's not regarded as an art the way, let's say, visual art or mural or music is regarded. So you're really looking for that feedback loop. And, you might get one comment on an episode. And if it's something that's negative, it's like, well, everything's bad. Moving on.
Yeah, no, you have to find those positive things to keep you going. Because, there might be a couple of bad things. But then if you know that you made one person happy hang your hat on that, focus on that, and know that there's more of that too. Those are just the people who spoke up, and that's the other thing is sometimes the people who speak up, they're speaking up because they're negative. Like the people who are happy don't always feel the need to comment,
So here's the last real question I have. And you know that you're not escaping this podcast without getting rapid fire questions. Because everyone gets rapid fire. It's like everyone, back in the day, everyone gets drafted. So with regard to the fashion industry, or even outside, I'll broaden it a little bit. If you can have both, that would be great. What is the greatest modern invention? You can go fashion oriented and outside of fashion.
Yeah, actually, I'll stick within fashion, but like the fashion as we know it, and then fashion going forward.
Sure.
I mean, outside of the sewing machine, outside of that, I think technology. So that's and I think that's probably one of the greatest inventions for a lot of industries. But technology is speeding up and fast forwarding progress in so many ways. Technology has given us tools to track transparency along the supply chain. Yeah. So we can really find out where things are going. Technology is helping us with the environment to work with farmers, and to work with, technology has given us closed loop water systems so that we can just keep recycling the same water as opposed to using new water and then putting the dirty stuff into the streams and rivers. So technology is just, from engineering to algorithms to, it's really it has the potential to have the greatest impact, I would say. And right now, interestingly, we haven't had an industrial revolution since the end of the 1700s into the early 1800s, machinery and stuff. And right now, I feel like we're in an industrial revolution right now, and it has to do with technology. And so that's probably one of the most exciting things. You don't know you're living in history, but we are. And hopefully this one we can call it a clean one, because the last one was super dirty.
Right. All right. So, thank you for answering all of my real questions, and now it's time to get weird. So, I have, I think I got 7 of them. So you know how rapid fire questions work.
I do. Yeah.
All right.
I've never been the recipient of them, but I've watched them and heard them.
Okay.
Yes.
Who are or who is a muse for you, fashion icon for you? Share who comes to mind when it comes to who's got really good fashion. You're like, you know what? I appreciate that. I dig that.
Yeah, it tends to be a lot of British women. And I'm trying to think of who comes to mind right now. There's like, I can't put a name to it, but I tend to like a lot of American women, I feel like can be, there's a lot of focus on sexy, like sexy, like cleavage, sexy. And I feel like British women, like the ones whose style I really like, they tend to be a lot more demure, but like super fashionable. And so I appreciate that. So it's women who, I'm trying to think of designers' name, like, not necessarily Chloe, but, so there's some brands that I can't give you a person, but I'm also making a group of British women.
That's
really
fun.
Weird.
But it at least gives someone like an angle. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's a narrow angle. British women.
I know, that's like, that's bizarre.
But I remember, because I've been on this deep dive, this Robert Greene deep dive, and they were talking about like, he was talking about like Coco Chanel's like kind of rebrand of her stuff in this kind of second wave. And I was like, oh yeah, like American women's, their sensibilities more connected to what she was doing. And I was like, being that she's clearly not American.
Yeah. No, and like, but the connection would be Coco Chanel really kind of was the gateway to sportswear, not like certainly more casual. It's still, you'd still think of Chanel like when Coco was there, it's dressy compared to, how we think about it now. But like she made things a lot more relaxed than women were used to because everything was so nipped in and tailored and slightly uncomfortable. And she was making clothes that were comfortable. And then, so I feel like she was a gateway for American designers to invent sportswear. So because that was really invented here by American designers.
We've gotten weird with it with athleisure.
Well, now we've taken it to another place. Yeah.
I can't go to coffee shops and see like weekend warriors wearing the same leggings and.
Oh, don't get me started on leggings. That they've become a staple for women is so depressing for me. Not to mention they ruin the planet, like because they're all like stretchy, non-biodegradable materials that are completely petrochemical. So I get I just hate leggings so much.
That talk. Yeah. Change out the leggings, something different. What are 3 words that would describe your fashion sense?
Uniform, masculine, and tailored.
It's giving Tilda. It's giving Glenn Close. It's giving
Tilda for sure. I don't know about Glenn Close, but definitely like old Diane, like Diane Keaton. Actually, like she's she's always sort of handled that. And like old. When I say old, I mean like from the 70s. Oh crap, what's her name? She was a really beautiful model. Still alive. Gap tooth. Lauren Hutton. Yeah, Lauren Hutton. Like great sort of quasi-masculine style. So anyway.
10 out of 10. Do you have a favorite era of fashion? Like what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, working at Ralph Lauren, you definitely go through the decades of references. The 70s gave us a lot. They gave us a lot of good and a lot of bad. But fashion keeps dipping into the 70s like it's an endless pot. It's like we just keep going there all the time. And I don't mind it. I'm not mad at it. I'm not mad at it at all. So there's, I don't know, the 70s were like the best and the worst of. It was like polyester and like disco and stuff, but there was like some really cool stuff too. I go back and look at like Earth, Wind and Fire albums and like the Spinners and like all like musicians and what they were wearing. And then there was like the hippie version, like there was like the really like keyed up, disco version. And there was the hippie version of the 70s. It covered so much ground. That was really interesting. That being said, I do like 60s, it was a lot more, especially 60s men's. Yeah. 60s men's looks were really good. They were pretty trim. Yeah. Whereas like 70s men's looks, not so much. Because that went into like really weird leisure suit land. And
what are we wearing?
Yeah, and I was like, not great for men especially. But but 60s men's was good. And I like so much. I mean, 50s is probably my least favorite.
A little too buttoned up in a certain way.
Well, it was like, it just feels very, like for women, it felt very housewifey, you know, like nipped in waist, big skirt. And yeah, it just felt like uncomfortable. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like the kind of like border between like the late 80s and early 90s, but I definitely thought of what you were saying when it comes to like, you got some good and you got some bad.
Yeah.
And I'm like, color block, that's cool. Crisscross backward clothing, not as
cool. Yeah. No, but the 80s now, so I was living in LA in the 80s and like, it was like pastels and graphic elements were everywhere. And yeah, that was a pretty fun era. Like asymmetry was, you know, kind of a big thing. And again, I always think about like musicians and bands because everything was MTV for like every influence to me came from MTV and like what Michael Jackson was wearing, what the Go-Go's were wearing. Like I was like drawing from those two, and I'd put that my outfit would be created by like borrowing from Michael Jackson with loafers and paper bagging my shorts to the Go-Go's with an asymmetrical like pastel colored top, you know.
I went through my, I have a closet that has like all of my fitted caps in there because I used to dress like a rapper from circa 2004. And I was like, I remember when I bought this hat. I was like, man, 2010 was a great year because sometimes the hats will have like the year that they did it. Oh. And I was like, yeah, Crooks and Castles, baby. Oh, wow, I spent $75 on this hat. Wow, I'm bugging out.
Wow,
and
that's
I was like, I haven't
pricey.
Worn this in a while. And but I keep it because it's like, to me, it's almost like art in some regards, or even I have this one thing. This is so corny and ridiculous. So I have an authentic Orioles jersey hung on my wall.
Wow, who was the player?
It was custom. It was my own.
Oh, you had your name on it.
Yes, and I worked there when I was in undergrad too. I worked there for 3 years. So there was
at Memorial Stadium, or was it Camden Yards?
Camden Yards.
Okay.
And so it was that layer there. But when they changed the jerseys, because I was there for this town hall thing, so the year after I left and I went off to my real job with the phone company, I noticed that one of the things that was mentioned, we want to see Baltimore on the jerseys. New York, they had theirs. Boston has theirs. We want respect. That's what the, season ticket holders wanted. And it's like, so when we leave Baltimore, we want to see Baltimore on our team's chest. So when that jersey came out, that was the first one I got. Yeah. Because it had Baltimore on the front.
Wow.
I was like, I don't want Orioles on there. That's fine. And it has a really cool like patch that has like the Maryland flag on it.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's fire.
The Maryland flag is like the best flag in the country. Like I forget what happened one time. I was like, I looked at all the state's flags. I think it's because like some of my family members were like, they're very Maryland flag proud and it shows up on everything. And so I was looking at all the flags of the country. I was like, it actually is the best one. It's like the best flag. Yeah. It's like hardcore graphics. They're really good. Yeah. So the Orioles, I was always kind of partial to the bird because I feel like everybody knows the bird. It's like so recognizable. It's also one of like the early teams, right?
Yeah.
Baltimore's teams.
It's funny, when I did the interview with Todd Radom, he mentioned my favorite bird of the iterations, and he was like, yep, 1966. I was like, why do you know that? He's like, technically didn't make the jersey or a hat. And I was like, come on, man, don't kill it. He was just like, it was an alternative that they didn't use, but 1966 was the year they won the World Series. I was like, why do you have this? And I was like, I do the same thing when it comes to movies, so you know your lane. Yeah. It's the angry bird that has like the bat and it looks like.
Oh, yeah. I love that bird. I love that
That's
bird.
That's my favorite one, yeah.
Yeah, and I used to be a huge Orioles fan when I was growing up.
So, I got two more here. Favorite book?
Oh, man. I have a favorite author.
There's a lot of books in here, by the way.
Yeah.
So good on you on that.
Yeah. My favorite author is this Japanese guy, Haruki Murakami.
Yeah.
Oh, you like him?
Yes.
Oh, you read him? Anyway, yeah. Oh, my God. So we have we just, whenever one comes out, either my husband gets it or I get it. So he's my favorite author, and I'm looking at one of the books right now in our house. It's IQ 84, which is like crazy, because he does this fantastical kind of writing. It's like, it feels really real and present in terms of timing. But like something fantastical always happens that takes it out of reality, and you get totally transferred. You just totally go with it. And the way he writes about his characters, it's with such sensitivity, and care, even if they're bad people, like they're still sensitively dealt with. So anyway, he's my favorite author. What's your favorite book?
I don't know if I have
a good question.
I don't know if I have a favorite book right now, because I've literally I've struggled with it. This notion, I'm a slow reader and I get daunted by it. So my way of consuming has been like audiobooks, and it's like, okay, I can do multiple things. I can't quiet the brain to read. But I remember it was this book. I think the dude's name is Thomas Cleary's The Wisdom of Wolves.
I don't know.
And no, sorry. It was called Way of the Samurai. That's what it was. And it was basically, I used it along with this mindful meditation practice I was doing that was aligned with Bushido and things of that nature. It's like I would really get caught on catastrophizing everything. Oh, this is going to end terribly.
I've never heard that word, catastrophizing. That's a good one.
It was a word my therapist threw around a few times, and he's like, that samurai used to just sit there and envision their death in a really, really dramatic way, because they know it's not going to happen that way, but they would do that to get over the fear of it. He's like, so maybe use that practice of this thing that you are sitting there thinking it's going to be a catastrophe. It's going to go horribly. He's like, just make it cartoony bad. An anvil is going to hit me while I'm doing a podcast. He's like, it'll never happen. Yeah. But the goal is to get yourself over this idea of failure or whatever is really causing you concern and distress.
Interesting.
And that's one of the things that's in that book.
Huh.
So it was reading it while going to therapy.
Did your therapist recommend that book, or did you happen to have it?
I happened to have it. Oh. So I was like, they all just came together.
Serendipitous, yeah.
Yes. And this is the last one I got for you. So you mentioned earlier about comics. So what's a comic that you were reading growing up that you're like, you know what, I got to dip back in there? Yeah,
growing up, I was young, so because it's embarrassing to say this right now.
Oh, wow.
So because I was 10, I guess, yeah. But I don't even know if they still exist. They were Chili and Millie the models. They were these two white girls. And they were models. And so they always had good clothes. And so I'd always draw them in their great get up. So Millie and Chili the models. And then Archie comic books.
Nice. Yeah.
And those are pretty much I didn't read superhero comics. I was not, and I'm still not really into superhero stuff, but those are them. Those were they.
I dig it. So, as we wrap here, one, I want to thank you for being on this podcast.
Thank you.
And two, I want to invite and encourage you to really share anything you feel like we didn't really key in on this interview, and tell folks where to check you out online.
Oh, thanks. So LinkedIn. I have Instagram, but it's not really very interesting. Anyway, but Thomasine Dolan or Thomasine Dolan Dow on LinkedIn is kind of, you can contact me through that. Instagram is Tom Dolan, but which was the name when I had my own clothing line for a few years. It's a women's line. It was called Tom Dolan. And because I wanted to be kind of androgynous, so that's I really like androgyny to some degree, in terms of.
I do as well.
Okay, yeah, I think I find that really appealing, and that's back to the Tilda Swinton thing too, right? So that's it. That's got my social media splurge. No, what's the word? Social media splurge or spiel. Yes, either or. Yeah.
I always joke and call it shameless plugs. Just just do it. Just make a buffoon of yourself.
Well, check out Material Innovation, MII's Material Innovation Initiative. Sure. That would be something to check out. MII, because that's if you want to learn anything about these next gen materials for fashion, home, and auto.
So there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Thomasine Dolan Dow for coming onto the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there is art, community, fashion in and around your neck of the woods. You just got to look for it.